Great. Well, I know we are running a little bit late, and I know we are waiting for one or two speakers, but I am going to begin because we have quite a packed session this morning. So I'm going to begin, and hopefully our panelists sneak in and join us. But I'd first my name's Kate Strawn. I'm the Senior Manager for Climate Change Resilience, DRR and Coastal Management at Italy Africa. And it's my absolute pleasure to moderate today's session on collective action agenda, locally led adaptation for multi-level governance. And yeah, I really am excited about this session as we gather to look at different people working on policies to on-the-ground action or research that's really addressing the shared priority around strengthening local responses to climate adaptation through water resilience. The climate reality we face locally is immediate and severe, which is, I think, many of our jobs address. And every day, climate impacts are taking an enormous toll on our communities across the globe. And we're seeing the world grapple with a water crisis that's only intensifying. And if we just consider that by 2050, over half the global population, around 5 billion people, will be exposed to water scarcity at least 1 month a year. And here in this region alone, millions are affected by desertification and the recurrent droughts, threatening food security, health, and stability. Global governments and cities and towns on the front lines of these climate-driven water challenges. In 2023, over 80% of major climate impacts were reported at the sub-national level. So not at a national level, but at a sub-national level. Cities and communities in low-income areas are struggling to access adequate adaptation funding, yet bear the brunt of having to deal with these crises on the front lines. The devastating floods in Kenya and parts of Europe last year just showed us that whether you're a village or a major city, the impacts are profound, and we need to be looking at how we deal with this water crisis at a local level. So today we're going to tackle this together, and we're going to look at two areas in this session. One on politically how we advocate for frameworks that empower local actors and strengthen their role in adaptation policies, and then technically how we need to innovate and what are the practical approaches that cities, towns, communities are taking and how they're collaborating through multi-level governance. So I'm really excited to welcome Carleen Maywald, our South Australian Water Ambassador, to provide us with a few opening remarks this morning.
Thank you very much, Kate, and it's my pleasure to be here with you this morning. My name is Carleen Maywald. I'm the South Australian Water Ambassador, and my past life in water involves the political front. I was the former Water Minister for the South Australian Government during the Millennium Drought, a crisis like no other that Australia had ever faced in regards to water scarcity and water shortage. We had a city like Adelaide in the south of Australia about to run out of water after 10 years of very intense drought. I also chaired Australia's National Water Commission, and I am now working with a number of organisations in the area of local adaptation. So my talk with you today is going to talk about our theme, which is locally led adaptation and multi-level governments, but I'm going to focus mostly on building resilience in water systems through collaborative governance and what that actually means. So just in the context of where we're operating, we all know that the climate is changing. We all know that we're having more and more intense and extreme events. We're having floods, droughts, longer periods of time where we've got water scarcity. And the climate impacts are horrendous, but on communities who are at the forefront of this are where we are increasingly having to invest in our adaptation efforts. Effective adaptation requires coordinated efforts at multiple governance levels, local, regional, national and international. And often we jump to what the answer might be from an infrastructure perspective before we actually invest in the people and the systems and the system strengthening. So I'm going to focus on the people, I'm going to focus on the system strengthening, and I'm going to do that because if we don't, this is what happens. We've seen these photos from Spain just recently. A disaster of proportions never seen before, and virtually anarchy on the streets where communities are completely left bamboozled by the extent and the damage that's caused to their communities and not knowing where to go. The community resilience to adapt to those kind of disasters is not there, and it's not in the communities, so the governments are blamed. So how do we fix that? What do we need to be doing to actually change going from, everyday living, absolute disaster, and communities not being resilient in the face of those kind of disasters? We've got to stop doing this. This is the way we've always done things, and I call it the hydro-illogical cycle, and I love this little graph. We sit here, we're apathetic about what's happening in the climate until we get a drought or a flood, then we get some awareness, then we get some concern, and then we get panic, then we get some money, and then it rains, and then we start the cycle all over again. That is something we have to stop doing. So what is locally led adaptation? So at the heart of locally led adaptation is people, and we have to change our focus from only infrastructure investment to investment in capacity development in people. It's not as easy for politicians to tick a box that, you've delivered so many taps, so many toilets, so many wastewater treatment plants, so many pipelines. Getting politicians and donors and funders to actually invest in people is really, really hard. But it's what we need to do if we're going to have a sustainable investment in infrastructure. The world is absolutely littered with good intentions, where people have built infrastructure and left, and communities are left with infrastructure that's unsurfaceable within 5 to 10 years. It's adaptation, and locally led adaptation is a bottom-up approach which enables the community to be involved right at the beginning. It's not an approach where the researchers actually have a look and see that there's a problem over there, the government and the policymakers see that there's a problem over there, they all get together, they decide what the problem is, they decide what the solution is, then they go and tell the community about their brilliance and the solutions they've found for them and wonder why the communities don't buy into it. Communities need to be engaged right up front. You need to decentralise the decision making and establish the systems and the system strengthening around the communities and their connection into not only the level of the governance of their villages, their communities, but their local governments, their state level governments, their subnational frameworks. Those subnational frameworks also need to be developed across agencies in government. We see that government agencies are just as conflicted in this water space as different sectors within the community, such as irrigation, urban water, environmental needs. Our government agencies don't sing with one voice. And so we have to work hard to try and bring those into a collective conversation about what locally led adaptation is. Local communities also have intimate knowledge of the water resources and the challenges in their region. And they will bring to the table the perspective of their local knowledge. And if we allow them in right at the beginning of the process and allow local communities to lead the adaptation in regard to the identification of what the problem really is that they're trying to fix, and then help them to work through to a solution that's going to be sustainable for them in the long way. This ensures the water systems are more resilient for the local communities, and that the local communities will be able to self-determine what the solution is and how it will be managed sustainably in the future. It actually empowers communities and increases accountability across all the levels. So, understanding what multicultural governance means is it's a framework of decision-making where you devolve decision-making and co-design the process by which you're going to be able to make decisions and come to decisions around what the solution is for that particular community. It recognises that water service position cannot be managed as a single level of governance. And it's one of those things that I think that we don't invest enough of our time and effort in, and we have to switch the focus from infrastructure as the solution to people as the solution. So what is the role of multi-level governance in water service delivery? Well, Effective water governance is the cooperation between local governments, municipalities, regional bodies, river organisations, national governments, but most importantly, it's about the community, putting community at the heart. It's balancing the local needs with the national policies, and the funding is crucial for water sustainability, not just for infrastructure, I'll say again, but for investing in the people. National governments need to provide the legal frameworks, the policies and the financial resources to make this happen, but local governments need to focus on the service delivery at the local levels. Many of the strategies that we have for locally led adaptation in multi-level governance are really important in leading effective integration across those different governments. And those bottom-up initiatives need top-down support, and the local actors can identify vulnerabilities and adaptation needs. So how do you connect? I've just lost my place in my slides here, won't be a second. So the challenges in implementing locally led water adaptation are, of course, the capacity within communities. We need to invest in those communities. It's the governance, which is an issue, having the right systems, having coordination across all of those, and also the policy framework in which they're operating. I'm just going to give a little bit of a case study that I chair an organisation called WaterAid Australia, and WaterAid also works internationally, and I'm a trustee of WaterAid International. And we work in the area of system strengthening around water infrastructure. So WaterAid provides sanitation services, wash services in about 22 countries around the world. And we developed a program about 5 years ago with a number of local partners, a number of donors called Sustainable Wash. We started a system strengthening way of operating. I don't know what's happened to my slides here. Anyway, the system strengthening way of working actually focuses on the communities and the people and the local structures. It does an actual assessment of the capability within the local municipalities first. It actually then works through the local municipalities, including the departments of health, the departments of education, the Department of Roads and Infrastructure, and brings together a mapping of who's doing what, and then works on where the strengthening needs to occur. We work on governance, coordination, planning, monitoring, financing, accountability and water resource management, and social and gender dynamics that support good sustainable infrastructure. We create an environment where it's more than just the infrastructure, and people matter, right at the heart of everything that we do. Once again, we hold outreach workshops and have reflection meetings with communities so that there's an interaction between the municipalities, the local governments, the district management, the sub-national governments, and the agencies that they are all involved with, including health and agriculture, and also community urban water supply. We promote a process whereby everyone gets to be involved. There is a process of developing a local mapping, who's got what toilets, who's got what, so the community knows who's got what, and then they can start to pull together a plan collectively on what needs to happen. So this is what the framework actually looks like, and this is why it's so hard to do. Right there in the heart of this framework is the people, but these are all the players and the actors that circle around this. And all of the players and actors who are pulling money from all sorts of donors and regions are all playing in that periphery. But it's the investment that needs to come through to that central circle there that will make the big difference in how these projects roll out. So we've improved WASH collaboration mechanisms, we've integrated SDG indicators into the existing monitoring and planning systems, we've strengthened the national monitoring and information systems to collect data, we've supported the development of new national hygiene behaviour change and communication strategies, and we've also assured that the infrastructure in the long term is sustainable as a consequence. I'm just going to touch on another little, I'm not going to go into this one in detail, but in South Australia during the Millennium Drought that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we saw water scarcity like we'd never seen in Australia, and we took the opportunity at that time to actually bring together a national and a statewide and a community-driven process to develop a water for good strategy that looked out to 2050. and then help us map back what we needed to do from today. There's a link to the Water for Good strategy and how we did it on the bottom of that screen, so I won't go into detail on that one, but it was an incredibly important process of that community-led adaptation using multiple government agencies coming together to actually create a strategy that transcended government agencies, that actually enabled us to look at our water security in detail to 2050 and beyond, that long-term planning. So the principles for locally led adaptation that I draw from these case studies and from my notes earlier, inclusive decision making which involves all the stakeholders, especially marginalised group, which women and Indigenous communities right up front is really important. There has to be flexible governance to adapt governance structures to local contexts, ensuring that governance is responsible to changing climatic conditions. Capacity building is key. We have to strengthen local institutions and communities to manage water systems, and this requires investment and time. And it's not normally the kind of programs that we find that people and donors are prepared to invest in, but it is critically important for that sustainability of infrastructure investment. And we also need to have the long-term commitment, ensure that we're not doing this just to get in, get out, tick the box and finish our programs. We need to ensure that locally led adaptation efforts are sustained over time through funding and policy support. There's many opportunities for improving multi-level governance in water services by establishing platforms for dialogues across levels of government, national, local, but also across agencies. In my own home state of South Australia, we had 8 agencies with touch points in water. Those 8 agencies all have their own policies. Those 8 agencies all have different drivers and objectives. How can our communities understand how government speaks with one voice when they don't speak with one voice to each other? We need to leverage climate finance to support locally led adaptation projects, not just infrastructure projects. We need to build collaborative networks between government, the private sector and civil society to share knowledge and resources and to maximise the investment in the capability of local communities to become resilient to climate change. We also need to promote policy coherence to align local needs with national and regional policies because they don't necessarily look the same everywhere. And the conclusions that I come with and the way forward that I think we need to be investing is that local-led adaptation is critical for building water resilient systems in the face of climate change. If we don't invest in people, we will fail. Multi-level governance is essential for ensuring that local adaptation efforts are supported and scaled. The thing with investing in local communities and building local communities is that they are there for the duration. Governments come, governments go. NGOs come, NGOs go. The one consistency is the people in the communities, and so investing in those people is crucial if you want sustained outcomes. Future efforts should focus on strengthening those local capacities, improving the coordination and ensuring sustainable financing for water services are there. A collaborative approach between all levels of government will lead to a more effective and resilient water system. It's people that matter. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carleen. And I think you really touched on an important part and something that really is important to all of us here is that the people are at the heart of what we do. And yeah, bringing their perspectives and local knowledge to the table for decision making is so important. And we really do need to understand their lived realities if we're going to develop solutions that are context specific. I'm going to try something a little different now, and hopefully it works, we really are keen to hear from everyone sitting here today on your experiences. So we're going to ask you to take out your cell phone and we're going to try get some input from each of you. So we're going to pull up a QR code and hopefully this works. My success levels of this at events is not high. So hopefully people are in. And I'm going to start off with an easy question, a multiple choice question, so you don't have to do too much thinking. But the first question is around how frequently have you been directly involved in national discussions around climate change responses? And we've got A, regular structured involvement, B, inconsistent involvement, C, only once, or D, never. And hopefully we're going to see the results on screen. And Dorita's laughing because she knows my success rates are not great at this, but we have progress today. So we've got regular, 44% so far at regular structured involvement, 41% at inconsistent involvement, 18% at never. Right, my next question is going to take a little more of you guys to think, but what are the biggest, is there a next question, I don't know. Great. Next question is, what are the biggest barriers preventing you from engaging more meaningfully in national climate change discussions? And this is for you just to put down a word or 2 words. So it could be limited access, lack of resources, funding. So what are some of the barriers that you are experiencing? So we're seeing lack of funding coming up here quite a bit, too many players, limited access, a few times, access and bureaucracy. Great, and we're going to try to capture these and share them. And then my last question is what actions need to be taken to support greater local level involvement in discussions around climate change adaptation? So be more exclusive, funding, citizen involvement, awareness and education. Got quite a few inclusions, transparency, capacity building. Great. Feel free to add during the session because we will keep them open. I've now got the privilege of calling up our first panelists. And I'm going to call up Ramon Fernandez, who's our Regional Minister for Agriculture and Water in Andalusia, Spain. We've got Governor Cecily Mbari from Embu County in Kenya. We've got Patricia Locke-Dawson, who's our mayor from the city of Riverside, California. Evita Rosenberg, our policy officer, Water Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of the Netherlands. Kate Hart, Executive Director, Environment, Heritage and Sustainability Department for Environment and Water, South Australia. And then Faith Ngini, the National Coordinator for the Kenyan Platform for Climate Governance. If you don't mind all coming up and taking your seat here, I think we'll just use a roaming mic if that's all right. Make it easier than everyone jumping up and down. And I'm going to pose the same question to the entire panel today, and then we'll hear different perspectives. So my question to the panel today is, how have you developed multi-level governance systems to address water resilience linked to climate change in your region, and what challenges and opportunities have emerged, particularly in fostering collaboration across stakeholder groups? And I think we're going to start with Ramon, who's sitting right here, and if you don't mind beginning.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I apologize for my pronunciation, first of all. It's a pleasure to address this forum as the Minister of Agriculture and Water in Andalusia, the southernmost region of Spain, renowned for its unique climate and water challenges. For the past 6 years, Andalusia has been grappling with persistent drought as a consequence of climate change. Our water reserves, with a total capacity of nearly 2,000 cubic hectometers, currently stand at only 34% capacity, despite recent torrential rains. Andalusia is a region of contrast, ranging from the highest point on Iberian Peninsula to a coastline of nearly 1,000 kilometers. It includes both the area with the highest rainfall and an entirely desert-like zone. Ironically, Andalusia is known as the vegetable garden of Europe, supplying fresh, healthy food to 500 million Europeans each year. As leaders in fruit, vegetable, and olive oil production, we have achieved record agri-food exports with sales abroad totaling 10.8 billion euro from January to August this year. We have also set a record in tourism, welcoming over 12.5 million visitors between July and September. Agriculture and tourism are those two key pillars of the economy in our region, with 8.5 million inhabitants, much of which is arid and experiences scarce rainfall. For this reason, water is central to many of the regional administration's policies. Our water management policy, which involves one of our largest investment budgets, is built on 3 pillars: planning, investment, and execution. Given the current scenario, coordination among administration is essential. I could share details on many of our water infrastructure projects, those completed, those planned, and our initiatives on water regeneration and reuse. In all these areas, my answer to any question is always the same. All public administration in Andalusia must work together to ensure that essential water reaches the places it is most needed. Today, in COP29's Water Day, I can assure you that Andalusia has a clear and comprehensive approach to water policy. Hydrological planning is at the core of our strategy. In Andalusia, we believe that drought affects us all, which is why we have worked constantly and in coordination to engage society, the national government, and other sectors such as tourism, industry, and environmental protection to meet both present and future water needs. Water availability is essential not only for today, but above all for the future. Without water, Andalusia cannot move forward. The water we use for drinking is also the livelihood of thousands of families across the region. Without it, we have no future. Therefore, from Andalusia, we advocate for water policy as a state policy, a policy for everyone and by everyone. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ramon. And I think it's so important about the importance of that horizontal cross-collaboration between our departments, because so often there's perception that, well, this is the water department's responsibility, it's not our responsibility. So it's really encouraging to hear that there's so much cross-collaboration. Thank you. I'm now going to move to Honourable Cecily, the Governor of Mbu. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Cecily Barire. I am the Governor for Embu County. Embu County is in Kenya, and it's a sub-national government. And I want to begin by saying that we are a small county, but a rural county with slightly over 650,000 population. And we have been greatly impacted by climate change in a way we never witnessed before in the history of Kenya and of the county. Kenya has a devolved system of governance. We have the national government, and then we have 47 county governments, of which 7 are led by women governors, I being one of them. And so we have a lot of pressure as the women governors to make sure we do things differently, we become more sensitive to the needs of our people, and that we involve our people in looking for solutions that are homegrown. In 2022-2023, we witnessed 2 extreme weather patterns. One was extreme drought, the worst in 40 years. I remember that's the time we had just come in government. We had just finished our elections. And we attended the COP 27 in Egypt. And then from that extreme drought situation where there was immense hunger and we lost a lot of livestock, we moved to yet an extreme weather condition, which was El Nino, last year, where there was serious flooding in the country, and in particular in my county. And so out of those 2 extreme experiences, it became very clear to us that we needed to start to look for local solutions. We needed to build the capacity of our people, and we needed to look for solutions that are homegrown through a bottom-up approach. We began to engage communities that were most affected, and we engaged in assessing the risk factors and helping the people come up with solutions that they thought would work well for them. The biggest challenge that we've had is, number one, we did not have clear structures of how to handle the situation. And so we began by first establishing climate and environmental committees at the ward level. We have 20 wards. And so we now have committees that are set up right at the local level and who we've been training through our support from the World Bank. We also went ahead and made sure we brought in our water management structures into more sustainable structures. So we had small water community projects that were not sustainable, that could not withstand the challenges that they were facing. And so we began to bring them together and form bigger and more sustainable water companies or water structures. And that seems to be bearing fruit because we are building their capacities and making sure that they engage more meaningfully in water resource management. We further looked at the challenges the women are facing, because the women are facing very unique challenges, considering that they consume a lot of water at domestic level. And we decided to build boreholes, especially in the very dry zones, so that they can be able to spend less time looking for water and watering their livestock. And we bought a rig machine that has helped us get more boreholes drilled. But we are looking for partners because our biggest challenge really is resources. We are looking for partners that we can partner with so that when we do the drilling, we can then be able to equip those boreholes and get the water through the last mile delivery. I want to say that we face the challenge of having communities give up on themselves. So it is important that we build a lot of capacity in the communities. It is important that we also raise more awareness among the young people. I'm very happy that through Bloomberg Foundation, we've gotten a little funding that has helped small youth groups to start off small climate resilient programs that seem to be doing extremely well. We look forward for the same for youth, women groups especially. I have seen the 2 types of structures, women groups and youth groups, bearing a lot of fruit. When they get very little resources, they are able to do amazing work. We are looking at kitchen gardens, vegetable gardens, even in the small towns that before did not have major challenges. They are now congested, and we need to make sure that there are vegetable gardens, especially for the women, so that they can be able to feed their families and provide good nutrition for their children. I want to believe through the work of ICLEI and others, you'll be able to continue to support us and to give us these platforms to speak our story, to explain what it is we are going through at our local levels, and also exchange ideas. I mean, listening to the lady who presented from Australia, I kept feeling that although we are two extreme worlds in terms of development, that the challenges seems to be the same. How is the national collaborating with the subnational? How are we engaging our people so that we come up with homegrown solutions that are people-driven? How are we building the capacities of our communities? How, for example, as he said, are we coming up with policies, water policies, that can be able to take care of our resources, both in the short term, medium term, and long term? I think that for me, that is the most important as we speak here today. And I really hope that we will change as we move on. COP will stop being just a talk shop, but become a place for solutions, a place for harnessing our resources and directing those resources where they are most needed. And I want to believe that the most hard hit by climate change is Africa. So we need money in Africa. We need money to change our communities. We need support to be able to live better lives in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. And the County of Mbu actually received an incredible award at the World Urban Forum
Yes.
2 weeks ago around their water work with communities. And so, yeah, I think you've got a lot to share with the rest of the world also. They can also learn from what you guys are doing.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, we got an award 2 weeks ago in Cairo for a really bottom-up program with informal settlement in Embu town. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Evita, do you mind going next? I seem to be jumping across the panel here.
Yes, thanks, Kate. That was unexpected. No, thank you so much. And first off, let me start with saying it's a privilege being on among such an impressive panel. And also my favorite day at COP is Water Day today. And I work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands on water, but I also have a side position, which is I'm a member of provincial parliament in my province, hometown, south of Holland. So I find this topic incredibly interesting because we're combining both of all the different types of levels of governance here around the table. So first off, thanks to the organizers for bringing us all here together. And maybe a little bit about the Netherlands, as I'm here on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We also, as many of you have seen the results of climate change. And we also, as the Netherlands, worked with water for the past centuries. And basically our democracy was based on locally led governance, where the local communities had to work together to fight the water. And out of that was our first democratic body, the water boards were established, which I always find very interesting. However, we still see, and I also base it on my experience working in local government, that we still have a lot to learn, specifically with climate change only getting worse. We've seen horrific examples also in Spain. My condolences for this tragedy. But it means that we very much have to step up our game to ensure that we are ready and the communities are ready for the disasters that may come in the future. Which brings me to the linking the national to the local. And as the Dutch government, we organized the second UN Water Conference, or the first UN Water Conference in nearly 47 years, the UN 2023 Water Conference. And as part of that, we had this water action agenda to accelerate progress and action. And as part of that, we developed a program which is called Water at the Heart of Climate Action, which basically brings satellites to sandbags and trying to tackle the issue of, and I see my colleague here of IFRC nodding, who Nini will share more information about this in the technical panel. But basically, it's in 5 countries in Africa supporting that the data will be linked to the local communities and also to their risk preparedness. And before ending this, I just want to share 3 challenges that we also in this program ran into when it comes to locally led adaptation, which was mentioned in the keynote, is pivotal to prepare ourselves for climate change. But 3 challenges that we ran into is, one, it links to the wash system strengthening approach that was mentioned also as work that WaterAid does, amongst others. That is that we have to go from donor-led control to locally led trust. But again, that is also very difficult in a political time where international aid is also much under scrutiny, and you need to have patient public funding. However, we're also controlled by parliament, and they expect concrete results. So that's the first. Secondly, we need to make sure that local communities have access to climate data. And as part of the, for example, Water, Peace and Security program that the Netherlands support, we try to ensure that data ends up at the local communities and to prepare them for water-related risks and possible disasters. And thirdly, we need to make sure that we prepare local communities to build their capacity, as also mentioned in the keynote speech, because they are the very first responder to the climate disasters, as we've seen a few weeks ago as well. However, we see in national and international policies that this is often not taking place, that there's still a large gap between local communities and national communities. And maybe to mention, from my duo role, I just filled in the Mentimeter myself. And with the question, how often are you involved in national policies, I took off my national government hat and I put on my provincial hat, which is a funny thing because that works like that in the Netherlands, because it's different sort of governments. But it also shows that I'm not directly involved in our Dutch government approach to climate adaptation. I'm working internationally. So with that Mentimeter, I actually answered not always involved in the planning. And I think I will stop there. The action is very much ongoing with wonderful initiatives, programs that we heard from the previous speakers, but there's so much more that we still have to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Evita. And I think, you touched on 2 key points, and that's trust building with our communities, which is so important, is to build that trust and get that buy-in from our communities. If we want successful adaptation on the ground, we need to build that trust with our communities. And I think, you're touching on the fact that multi-level governance isn't always perfect everywhere. I think often my experience is a lot in Africa, and I think a lot of Africans, we sit there thinking, well, it's only in Africa that multi-level governance doesn't work. Everywhere else in the world, it, must be working. But it's nice to hear that, there's still challenges even outside of Africa. So thanks so much. Kate, you next.
Thank you so much. So I work for the South Australian Government, which is a sub-national government within Australia. And Carleen very well painted the picture in terms of what's happening at national and state level. So from the South Australian Government's perspective, we see a significant role in relation to ensuring that there's resilient water supplies and that we actually have the correct governance framework around water, focusing also on water reuse and recycling. And the South Australian Government has invested significantly in these approaches to provide water resilience and water security. We also have had significant climatic conditions. So Carleen talked about the Millennium Drought, when the state almost ran out of water, that in actual fact the government was considering having to buy bottled water for domestic use. And for that to happen, it was a significant trigger to respond to establishing a water security statement for the state. We then, last year, went through what was one of the most significant flooding events, and that flooding event impacted on thousands and thousands of homes and people. And so you see these dynamic situations happening that will influence what the government's role is. What the government is really seeking to do is not only ensure water security, but to be able to respond to these significant flood events. It's really interesting to work with communities and get to understand what they think about water security and how they would respond. I'm working on a particular project in an urban context setting, and the majority of people that live within that water catchment have no idea that it floods. And we had a significant flood in this area about 10 years ago. And since then, the community has changed. And we've had a lot of urban development happening in that community. And when you go and talk to that community, very little understanding about flood awareness, what to do when there's a flood, and how their properties would be impacted. At the state level, we've also been looking at a significant, we have a scenario of water licensing systems, and the state has a number of levels in relation to that. So the state has a commitment in relation to water security. Within a regional setting, there are water allocation plans, and there are 8 natural resource management boards, and those boards are facilitating water allocation plans principally for primary producers, so that we don't over-allocate the water within catchments. It's very easy to see a scenario where water is a defined resource and it is over-allocated. There is a value placed on that water, and I think we need to manage how that value is then applied and who has access to the water. I sit on a stormwater management authority. This is a state-based authority working with local governments in relation to catchment water management. Catchments do not respect governance boundaries, and one of the biggest challenges in catchment management is that you must be able to work across many local jurisdictions, and those local jurisdictions may not always agree what's happening within a catchment. The Stormwater Management Authority seek to bring those jurisdictions together on a catchment basis and develop catchment management plans so that we can actually manage the water within that catchment. It is quite a dynamic area, and I find that we are doing a lot of planning and strategy and policy, but the delivery on the ground is really difficult because these local authorities don't have the resources to then deal with stormwater catchment issues, and they're struggling to then deliver on the commitments that they're making in the stormwater management plans. And I think it's a real challenge for communities right around the state in relation to that. The natural resource management boards are working on climate action plans, and within the climate action plans, looking at sustainable approaches to water management and heat management, and how a green environment can change how much water is utilised and the amenity of that area. And I think it's extremely important that we actually develop up an urban approach to water management to facilitate green spaces, because that directly impacts on health and, in actual fact, how much water that community has access to. The only other area I just wanted to touch on in terms of water, which isn't necessarily about water supply, but it's the coast. And we have significant coastal adaptation processes trying to be managed around flooding from the coastal areas. And so you have a combination of stormwater management, which can bring a flooding, coastal management, which can actually have coastal flooding combining to really impact on a community. So I think we can't discount the converge between where we have urban communities and we have water management issues associated with coastal issues. But overall, I think if there is a structured approach to policy planning, strategic planning and delivery plans, then we can achieve a structured response to water management and engage with the local community. And I'll just bring us back to the fact that a lot of communities don't understand what happens in terms of water in their local environment. They want to turn the tap on and access water. They don't necessarily understand what happens from an environmental perspective in terms of water sustainability and the impact that a change in the climate can have on them.
Thanks so much, Kate. And I think, it's really important around that whole thing around community awareness and education. And I think so often you hear, it'll never happen to us. We'll never experience, we live in a big city, we'll never experience a drought, or we'll never experience a flood. And I mean, we've seen it even in South Africa, in Durban with the floods in 2022, where many lives were lost, and many of our wealthy citizens also experienced the impacts of a flood. And then we also often hear droughts, people saying, there's water in our taps, we'll never experience a drought. And yeah, I think there's some of us who've lived through going to collect water and in long periods of drought. So thanks so much. Faith, I think you next.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to share our experience as the civil society in Kenya and how we engage in the local governance. And I'm privileged to sit next to my governor from Embu County, so I believe our experiences will resonate. So I'll share about the enabling, how the enabling framework enables communities to be involved in the multi-level governance for water adaptation. So Kenya faces water scarcity in terms of access, and we only have around 43% of the population able to access safe water, with around 59% being in the urban areas and 16% being in the rural areas. So a larger population is still not able to access safe water. But then we are privileged to have a constitution that enables multi-level governance, that is the national government and the county governments. And that by itself creates a need to be able to engage in the multi-level governance approaches for the country. There's also the public participation provision that enables communities to make their inputs into the policy formulation processes. So at the national government level, of course, we have the Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation that is able to provide the policy direction for the country. And through public participation, we have made our inputs into those policy processes. Then we have the county governments, and the county governments within the climate space. We now have a very special program known as Financing Locally Led Climate Action. That program has enabled communities. It's a community-led program. So it has enabled the counties to be able to open up spaces for the civil society, the women, and the youth to be part of the decision-making process through the county steering committee, which is chaired by the governor. And then we have the county planning committee, which is chaired by the minister in charge of water and environment. And then every ward in Kenya now has a ward committee on climate change. So you can be sure around 1,400 wards in Kenya have a committee on climate change led by the community. That is work that has been done for the last 2 years. And in there, again, we are represented as a civil society. We also have a woman, we have a youth, and you have a representative of the indigenous people. So how does this help us as communities or as CSOs to be involved in this process? One, through the FLOCA program, the counties have dedicated 1% to 2% of their funds, of the development budget financing annually to climate change. Why is this important? It enables to have stability of resources for climate action. It is not in the overall budget, because in the overall budget it will be used for normal developmental needs. But when it is dedicated for climate, then it means that the community is assured that there is money for climate. Then the second thing is that the community are the ones who determine their needs through undertaking what you call participatory risk assessment. So communities were supported to be able to undertake a participatory PCRA, participatory climate risk assessment. And from the participatory risk assessment, they were able to develop what you call the County Climate Change Action Plan. So the County Climate Change Action Plan puts together the priorities of the community as far as climate is concerned, so that they are able, the money in the county goes to their needs. The second thing about that climate change action plan is that if you bring in the resources from the funding and you try to invest into anything else that was not put in there, then that is not considered an appropriate investment. So it is a fund that has a performance-related investment indicator, which then indicates that indeed what the community said is what actually the funds are doing. What have we seen happening? What we have seen is that we have seen ecosystem restoration, especially by the communities taking place. Next to just where my governor is sitting is Kanyanje Springs. That spring was actually dry. But through the community getting the funding, it has been restored. And today, if you go there, clean water is running down. The community now would like to bottle that water and be able to sell. So you can see how vibrant that community has managed to become. We are seeing water harvesting solutions coming up driven by the community themselves. We are also seeing irrigation being adopted as a solution for climate change. So has it been easy? No, it's not been easy, because this is like 2 years of putting in place such a structure across the country. I'm not speaking about one place. I'm speaking across Kenya, that is what is actually happening now. As civil society, we have a role of oversight and accountability in addition to participating in the solutions. So working together with the National National Treasury and Economic Planning, we have developed what we call the CSO engagement framework. The CSO engagement framework has a representative at every county. We mobilize the communities to identify their leader and establish a small committee that then is able to provide oversight into the flow of these funds. They're the ones who are telling us, no, this money is not being used correctly. No, today this money is going to we don't know where it is. And therefore, they are providing oversight into that particular process. They are also able to help us to draw information from the national government to the county government to the community, and as well as from the community to the county government and all the way back to the national government. So currently, we are undertaking a study on how all this is coming up together as PACJA, and we believe that the lessons that will come out of this nationwide decentralization of climate adaptation will really be helpful going forward. What have we learned? Communities know their needs. Sometimes we believe that if we sit in boardrooms, we'll be determining what they want. It's nice to add science, it's nice to add policy, but they really know what they want. And they really know where it pinches the most. What have we seen? Ownership of the process. Those people have told you they are not paid any salary, but they stay in the process, provide information, because they are stakeholders in the solutions that we are giving to them. So communities have capacity and power to transform if we empower them and give them the resources that they require to be able to help us make the difference that we are looking for. Of course, we are dealing with a global challenge, but then it requires local solution and local ownership going forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Faith. And it's really encouraging to know that funds are ring-fenced for actions within plans at a local level. Thank you so much. We're now going to move to Mayor Patricia Dawson.
Hi, thank you very much. Thanks for having me today. I am a watershed scientist by training, my academic training, so I love water and I love talking about it. And I think what's really helpful for me when I think about doing any kind of planning or implementing anything within the watershed with various levels of government is to think of your government ecosystem like a watershed and like all the pieces in it, right? And how they interact together as an ecosystem. And I think in the United States, we have our federal government, our state government, our regional governments, and then we have our cities. And generally, each has their role, and we must work together. But what happens often is the cities end up being told what to do, right? The cities, are you getting that? Yeah, I apologize. I think if I hold it straight. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the cities we have a lot of problem with, being told, well, here's conservation targets by the state. This is what you have to do, and you must implement this. And the only time that is really successful is when the locals, and I'm talking about the cities and the stakeholders that are there, are able to create their own way of meeting the targets because they know how to do it. So they're given flexibility around what they're being told to do. So that's happened in Riverside, where we're told you have to reduce your water use by X amount. So we figure out how to do that. Some tactics are like providing low water flow sprinklers, providing different types of water conservation measures that you can use, smart watering systems, all these things, providing incentives to our residents to be able to afford these things and put them in that make it the easy choice. So we figured that out. The community next door may not use those same things, but that works in Riverside. And for those of you that don't know, because you're not all from the United States, Riverside is in California. We're in Southern California, and we are almost a desert. We get 10 inches of rain per year in Riverside, but we are very, very, very wealthy. Because we have an aquifer below us that just has really no depth to it. It just is very, very deep and is considered to be, it's modeled out for very many years to come. So we are fortunate in that way. But that doesn't mean we still don't want to conserve. And the last thing I'll just talk about is one of the things I was saying was that we get a lot of being told what to do, and it's out of our control. Well, I think what you need to do is just take control and maybe fashion a system that works for you. And I was sharing this with some colleagues earlier that we had an issue in our Santa Ana River watershed where nobody trusted each other. Everybody was doing their own things. People were working in their own silos, and it didn't make sense. So we created a structure that had a longer term on it. We created a conservancy, a state agency. But to get there, we had to bring various levels of government to the table, but we brought the county levels, we brought the state, we brought the federal, but more importantly, we brought our NGO partners. We have a water conservation agency there. We have a wildland conservation agency. And they sit at the table, and they've created a plan for the river, which then led to creation of a state agency conservancy, which is now leading to funding for all the projects, which is now leading to congressional funding, which is leading to Bloomberg funding, which is, so you set up your structure how you want it, and I think you just have to take control of it. Of course, it's easy for me to say because I'm the mayor, but you have to take control of how to get your partners to do what you want them to do. So one way to do that is just to build a structure around a project, focused on a project, and then you can get your players to the table and be successful. So that's how we've worked it here.
Thanks so much, Mayor. And I think your challenge of being told what to do from higher up is a challenge that many face, and then having to deal with understanding what the community needs, but also ensuring that you do what you're told is a tough one. Before you all leave, I'm going to ask, and some of you touched on this, but maybe you could just summarize it, is if you could briefly provide a piece of advice or on how to build or ensure multi-level governance. So what would be one key take-home message to our audience today on building multi-level governance or a multi-level governance system? And it can either be local, national, local, community, if you don't mind. And we'll start this end and just move straight down, if you don't mind.
Well, in my opinion, multi-level governance is based in three pillars: dialogue, anticipation, and obviously collaboration. And this is the only way to conquer the future, to invest in different technology like desalination and recycling water, but always together, all administration together.
I'd say multi-level adaptation requires coordinated efforts across all levels of governance and across all actors in the society, because they all are part and parcel of the bigger picture, and creates ownership and is able to sustain the change you are trying to create. Thank you.
Multi-level governance requires conscious consultations. And these consultations should not be one-off, it should be ongoing. and that should be inclusive. So inclusivity of the different stakeholders, the different players becomes very, very key. And of course, beyond that, being able to harness all the resources that are available so that they can be channeled to the right programs and projects. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just super practical. So I think I've worked at all levels of government. So I've worked at federal, state, and local levels. So my advice is pick a project. Sounds okay. This sounds very simple and like you're thinking this woman's crazy, but you pick a project that
You to hold it higher up on the mic, I think it works, yeah. Remove your bottom hand, I think it's this. Yeah,
There?
there you go.
all right. Oh, okay. So being practical, pick a project and get everybody to the table and make everybody have a role and a responsibility. Get them working together and make them feel part of a winning team. And they, you may have long-term goals, but give everybody short-term wins. Everybody wins. They feel that they're there and they want to work together. And then that branches off into doing additional projects and additional programs and even additional structures and ways to approach things.
I think we need to recognise that water does not respect government boundaries. And it's really important that the collaboration is applied within its boundaries, not within our boundaries. And how do we actually ensure that communities are engaged within that area? The other point I just wanted to make is I think we have to remember that we need water for the environment. It is not just about human consumption or capacity for the economy. And if we don't actually ensure that we actually invest water for the environment, we won't have it in the future.
And I absolutely agree with everything that has just been said. And I would like to add that multi-level governance, in my opinion, also starts with trust and with patience. And specifically also patience to change the system and to have a total inclusion. Because in order to go fast and to tackle climate change, we have to go slow at first.
Thank you all so much, and some incredible advice there around dialogue, anticipation, collaboration, trust, patience, cross-boundary collaboration, investment in our environment and water, short-term wins, and consultation, inclusivity. So I think all fantastic advice, and thank you so much each for your time today and your incredible interventions. Thanks so much. And I'm now going to call up our next panel, and we've got Sahanaz, from our Executive Director from ICLEI USA, Michael Alexander, the Head of Water, Environment, Agriculture and Sustainability, Diego. We've got Prof. Bradley Mogridge from Associate Dean for Indigenous Leadership and Engagement at the University of Technology in Sydney, and Nini Ikale Neyman, who's the Lead Climate Adaptation at IFRC.
That's right. It's a long way away from home now. Yeah.
Thank you, each of you, for joining us. I'm going to start as Sahanaz. I'm going to start with you today. What innovations are local governments implementing to address water issues under climate pressure, and how are they securing financing for adaptation?
Wow,
that's quite a big question.
That's a very big question. One thing that I kind of feel probably would be something that people can take away from here, and kind of connects the previous conversation to what this panel is supposed to tackle is kind of like how do you this bottom-up approach to adaptation and financing could be implemented to bring the community to the ground. So I want to touch on some points that are very important. We often, when we have climate impacts felt in the community level, the trust is a big issue. So it's usually impacting people the most that have been left behind for a long time, and then the situation is exacerbating their challenges, and the community is becoming really unhappy. So how do you actually will think about bringing the community to the table to be part of the solution is a big question mark. So I think that's like really the innovation in the social level that we should be thinking about. So a couple of things I want to touch base on that. One is, if you're thinking about the community and empowering the community to be at the table, you need to think about it as a full ecosystem. It's like they're not there just only to check the box. They're part of the vision making, but they're also part of the implementation. What does it mean? It means that you need to give them the decision power, the power to decision making throughout the entire process. They need to be able to not only set the vision, not only be part of the solution making, but also have the power to say, oh, this is not going according to what we plan or according to the way that we identified the issue or like a solving issue. We need to like correct course, go back and like rethink this. So that's like a really doesn't seem like a very rocket science, but it's important. We forget about that piece, that decision making should be a part of this, power should be a part of this process to make a real and meaningful change. One other thing is that about the financing is the cost of financing adaptation projects are really high. So we know that we have built systems that were for different climate, and we have like invested infrastructure over like many hundred years. Now the system is changing, and the cost of bringing them up to a level that they would be able to respond to this new climate reality is very high. In some of our communities across the United States, even like within a small region, it tops over 110 billion just to bring some of the main infrastructure that is like transportation related or the core of the community up to a level that could sustain the climate change. Nobody has that money. We can't foresee a future that the government could fund this much of like a projects like just for resilience. It really requires us a structural change in the way that we are thinking about the investment in infrastructure to be able to actually respond to this disaster. What does that mean? It means that if you are investing in a road, which is like many of the local governments are doing, like filling the potholes, it's always there. Like there's always some money assigned your budget for that. How do we actually think about it differently? Is there any way that we can rethink this whole process of investing in our infrastructure in a way that it's climate resilience? How we can use those dollars to be able to fill those gaps? So one of the things that we do at ICLEI USA, we offer climate budgeting cohorts of our members that they actually can start rethinking their budgetary process, what are the opportunities, how some of the monies that is there available can be used in a way that address some of those needs and fill the gaps. Again, don't go for usual suspect, just think about the structural changes to what you do, because this crisis requires us to really rethink the way that we are doing what we are doing. So I will leave you there. I think that's a really the way that we should go forward.
Thanks so much. And I love the point on community as part of the visioning. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to admit when something's gone wrong and having to go back to the drawing table. I think we all want to be perfect and we want to move on the upward trajectory and not go backwards,
right.
But it is important.
One thing that I also should probably mention in the community part of it, which I should have touched on, is engagement and decision-making power is important. Also, there are other aspects of what we can learn from our past experiences, generally in like the way that we have run our societies. We also need to remember that any investment that we're making and any new upgrades that we're bringing to communities usually results in a level of gentrification and pushing some communities out. So being mindful of that will also like help with building trust to like communicate that, say that we are aware of it, we know that that's a possibility, that any investment that we make in our communities could result in that, how we are like getting ahead of that to keep the community there, which I think is important. The other piece is that we have like a crisis of that we have a workforce issue in so many levels, not only because of the climate. Our society is changing as a whole. We have like some of our community members in the past that were like working this like different sectors. Now they are losing their jobs to technology. That's like another crisis that we're dealing with. How this transition to new economy could help, an adaptation could help those people to re-engage and see a future for themselves. Is that something that from the framework of opportunity we should be paying attention to? And it could help with the trust.
Thanks. And yeah, important point on the co-benefits and looking at, a society isn't always worried about rainfall and climate change, but they are worried about ensuring that food's on their table and that they have a livelihood. And I think that links to your point on finance and structural changes and I think ensuring that the finance department is at the table. So often I think we work in silos to a certain extent where when you're dealing with climate change, we have the climate change department or the environment department when we're working with them, and we forget that actually the finance department also needs to be there and they need to be rethinking about how they finance.
And that's bringing me to probably another point that I should mention. The United States was very fortunate during Biden and Harris administration that we saw a lot of investments in the climate area. And one of the largest funding that's coming to our communities are greenhouse gas reduction funds. It's not in only adaptation, it's adaptation and mitigation at the same time. And one of the challenges that we are seeing is many of our budget offices are used to traditional financing structure, bonds, through bonds and all of that. And like deploying this new money on the ground is like becoming a really big question marks for our communities. Even the money is there, we're just like trying to figure that out.
Thanks. And I think we're going to have a few questions from the audience just now. So I'm going to pop over to Michael, and if you can just chat to us about how can large private sector entities go beyond CSR to support urban resilience and multi-level governance.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks very much. And it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So just quickly, who's Diageo? Many of you probably don't know who Diageo is, but we're an international alcohol company, the largest probably globally. And we have a lot of distilleries and breweries around the world, including in Kenya. We've just heard about Kenya, including in Australia, and then about 30 other countries around the world. And we make brands like Johnny Walker, Guinness, Smirnoff, maybe Tusker, and other sort of local brands. But more importantly, about a third of our volume, and therefore perhaps a third of our income, comes from very water-stressed parts of the world. So that might be Latin America, Mexico, Turkey, India, Australia, East Africa, West Africa. So we're very, very much exposed as a company to water stress. And water stress is climate stress. So our number one climate risk that we have to disclose in our strategic report is water. So water is our biggest priority. And that means we have to do two things. We have to get our own act together. We have to make sure that we're operating our breweries and distilleries very well, that we're meeting best practice, that we're using water efficiently, but also discharging water responsibly. But more importantly, we have to work with others. And now more than ever, you'll find amongst corporates, big corporates that many of you will be familiar with, particularly food and beverage and agricultural companies, they are very much committed to something which we call collective action. Collective action on water. And this is absolutely fundamental to us to addressing our climate risk. Water risk is a shared risk. It's a catchment level risk. It's shared amongst, we've heard this morning around the different stakeholders, the different players that have a different approach and a different priority around water. But obviously I'm looking from a business perspective, but I can't look just from a business perspective without looking at the community requirements for water, the environmental requirements for water, the government structures around water. And this is where this collective action comes to play. So many companies are looking to work much more at a grassroots level, locally led, not by the companies. Companies shouldn't be, private sector shouldn't be leading these water collective actions, but they should be part of the solution, and they should be contributing to that, not just through investing in nature-based solutions which drive better water availability and improved environmental water solutions, but also through community engagement and through government engagement. So I think that's probably where the biggest challenge has been for us. So we've been working in India, we've been working in Kenya, we've been working in Mexico, driving and convening corporates to work together with local communities and local government to look at solutions to address the climate risk that we have. Our number one climate risk, as I said, is water. If we don't work with others, we will not address our climate risk. We will not be able to grow our businesses in these catchments, and therefore we need to work collaboratively across multi-stakeholder collaborations to really, really drive a shared vision of a solution for the water stress we face. So we're working with lots of companies. We're working with organizations like the Alliance for Water Stewardship and the Collective Action Accelerator, which is growing and growing with popularity. We're working with WaterAid, we're working with WWF, with TNC, with the UN Global Compact. All these organizations are really driven by trying to convene companies and communities and policymakers and regulators to work together at a catchment level to co-invest in a shared vision to address the shared risk of water. And it is challenging. It is very challenging. I don't think that traditionally the public sector, the governments have seen private sector as any role in looking at policy, looking at regulation, looking at infrastructure planning, looking at data, looking at finance models. I don't think they've come to the private sector in the past. But the private sector views us, holistically, if you like, through both economic lens but also a social lens, clearly, because our employees work in these watersheds and are equally vulnerable to the climate risks and water risks that everybody faces. So I think it's a big challenge for these collective actions, for companies to become part of the solution, for governments to open up and to recognize at a community level, at a state level, at a federal level, to really try and engage with the private sector more proactively. Not because we've got all the answers or all the money, absolutely not. But we have a shared risk as well as communities. And as I said, our employees are in those communities as well. We have big, extensive agricultural supply chains in many different parts of the world where they are very vulnerable to water stress. These aren't irrigated crops, these are rain-fed crops that are at the mercy of the heavens, and often the rains don't come and the crops can't get planted. So I think it's extremely important that we open our minds to recognize that the private sector, through this collective action, as I said, through the Alliance for Water Stewardship, through the CEO Water Mandate, which is UN Global Compact Initiative, through WWF, all of them are prioritizing basins to work together to address the risks and to drive solutions. So it's fantastic to be here today to have this opportunity to share that, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And you touched on a good point. We are facing a climate crisis at the moment, and it is a shared risk. And often when we talk about catchment management, we often only talk about the different municipalities and level of government and communities that are involved in that catchment management plans. But it's actually so important that private sector is at the table and is involved in these catchment management plans. And it's not just about cross-boundary collaboration, but it's also about ensuring that the private sector is there. And as you said, your communities work in your industry and they rely on water also. So thank you so much for that input. I'm now going to move to Bradley. If you could touch on what are the barriers and opportunities for Indigenous communities to influence multi-level governance on water resilience?
Oh, that's a big one. Yeah, look, I think I'll probably start. Oh, there. Okay, so I'll start globally when you think about Australian context. With the driest inhabited continent on Earth, 70% is classed as semi-arid to arid. So yeah, we don't have much rainfall in the dry parts. And Australia, to a point, only responds to a crisis. That's our feeling anyway on the ground. Carleen, our keynote, she talked about the Millennium Drought, and I suppose that moved straight in. We had a little bit of rain, and then we moved straight into the mega drought. And I think maybe we need a naming convention for droughts, like cyclones and things like that. So we only seem to respond to the drought. So we've had two of the worst droughts on record in the last 30 years. We've switched from El Nino to La Nina in the last 3 years. So we've had wetter conditions than normal, and La Nina is hanging around a bit more. And it has obviously climate change has actually increased some of the flooding. So, there's a small coastal town in the mid-east coast of Australia in New South Wales. It had 2 1 in 500-year floods in a matter of months. So they're two flood events that should only happen every 500 years. They had 2 of them. So there was lives lost, property lost. So it was horrendous. So, those sort of things. And we've had our rivers drying up. There are multiple aspects to that. Climate change is definitely one of them, but over-extraction is a key part of that. And then I suppose as we move into the future, Indigenous people are definitely saying the climate has changed. It's not climate change. It's sort of, we've got to try and flip the language a bit, because there's limited opportunities for Aboriginal people to have a voice. It's definitely in the Australian context. We contribute the least, but we're impacted the most. And we're already adapting. We're not hanging around for mitigation or net zero 2050. The climate has changed, and those communities have to adapt now. And then I suppose when you think about Aboriginal people in the Australian context, they've been there for thousands and thousands of years, and we've already survived climate change. So at the end of the last ice age, Aboriginal people were talking about moving, they have stories of moving to higher country and higher ground. And so those stories still exist in language and in stories. So they're not make-believe or myth. So science has proven that we had an ice age, and obviously as the sea level started to rise and the climate had changed, Aboriginal people had to adapt. And so those observations and that impact is in their psyche, and it's spoken about, it's told about constantly. So from what the challenges we also face is the funding aspect. So Indigenous people are a minority in Australia, but it's a first world country, it's a developed country, so we can't really access funds to do climate research or water research. So, my privilege in being an Aboriginal person, but also being an educated Aboriginal person in a Western system, has allowed me to, go through university, do the degrees and all that sort of stuff. But I've had to do research rather than, we're sort of flipping the paradigm of Aboriginal people always being the researched to now being the researcher. So we're flipping that on our own, rather than waiting around for governments or other organisations to do it for us. We've had to do it ourselves. So we're funding it ourselves. I had to fund my own research through a PhD. So I thought that was the only option. So you get a little bit of money to do your research, and away you go. But I suppose it's allowed me to do something to look at our landscape, our little patch, and our landscape and our special water places, on why water isn't in certain places. So there's cultural indicators that suggest water should be in these places, and there's indicators, natural indicators as well, ecological indicators, and so they'll link up with the cultural indicators. But these places aren't getting water, whereas before they used to, and they can become carbon sinks as well. So that research was with by and for my people. So I had to develop a research project to do that. And I suppose the other telling factor is Aboriginal people have always been in the Australian context, and we're not going anywhere. We've always been there, and I suppose, you know, people will come and go, and like we saw in our millennium drought, farmers were leaving their properties, but Aboriginal people were coming back because the country was, our land was sick. Other things is we're seeing funding being developed, especially in our part of the world. We're a little island west of big island called New Zealand, but the Pacific is getting a lot of money and a lot of things from the Australian government. Aboriginal people aren't in their own country, so I suppose we're fighting that challenge. And I suppose, you know, we're starting to look overseas rather than in our own backyard for funding opportunities. And, you know, if anyone's got any buckets of money, let me know. And I think, you know, that there's some big challenges definitely for Aboriginal people. We find ourselves, we're here in decent numbers here at COP. I think there's about 35 Indigenous people from Australia have come here. And we're finding that we're not engaged and we're still voiceless. So I suppose it's how can we get to those tables of influence and get to have influence on some of those decisions. We find ourselves always giving advice for free, and then obviously people use that advice for their benefit. And in the end, as I said, we're not going anywhere, and we're to a point we're ready for people to start talking to us and engaging with us, especially around climate adaptation, because we've done it before. And and also the other challenge is we need to be careful of the green economy. So a lot of these minerals that are needed for the green economy are on Aboriginal land, and they will get no benefit. There's no benefit sharing. It'll just be a big hole on their territories. And I suppose that's the other challenge that and if we fight against that, we'll be seen as against the green economy, you know what I mean, the future, moving towards, you know, renewables and things like that. So we have to make sure that Aboriginal people are part of the benefit sharing rather than just, you know, you might get a few dollars here and there as compensation or royalties, but in the end, yeah, we don't get anything. So sorry, it's a sad, depressing story. But yeah, I'm here to fight.
Thanks, Bradley. And I think there's many communities, not just in Australia, but all over that are fighting the same cause here at COP. But I think you touched on the same point that Colleen touched on, is that we respond when there's panic or crisis, and often that's too late, and we need to be responding earlier. And I think also storytelling is often forgotten, and it's such a valuable tool, and it can teach us so much. And we should be telling stories, and we should be listening to those stories that have been passed down from generation to generation, because they do hold a lot of keys to dealing with the climate crisis. And we've seen it all over, that many of our communities are putting in place adaptation measures that can be scaled, and they actually work. And so often we sit in big boardrooms, as someone said, and we have all the scientists around the table who are coming up with these innovative solutions, yet so many solutions already exist, and we should be looking at those solutions. And I think one of the other points you touched on is your research is for the people, and it's not just extractive. And I think it's really great to hear that, because so often researchers go in, extract information, and especially even at a local government level, we see it so often that they go in, they interview every local government official, they take what they need, and they don't actually leave behind something that's really valuable for our cities or our decision makers to use. So it's really exciting that you are giving back. Yeah, no, please.
Can I just add something? Sorry. Yeah, like I suppose especially for Indigenous scholars in the academic world, you know, you have to do it right. Otherwise, you don't work in Indigenous affairs, or you don't, you know, there's a thing called the Aboriginal grapevine, and it'll work faster than any broadband network. It'll be on the other side of the country in no time that you did it wrong. So I suppose it's we have to ensure that we maintain cultural integrity, but also integrity in our science as well. So it's another big challenge. So you're 24/7 Indigenous, but you're 9 to 5 scholar.
It's a tough balance, I think, for many people. So I'm going to move on to, because I do want to allow a few minutes for questions from the audience, is Nini, if you could touch on how is the Red Cross strengthening community-based adaptation and water resilience through multi-level partnerships, and what practical steps have proven most effective?
Great, thanks so much, Kate, and I'm really happy to be here. I find it fascinating that whether we're talking about Indigenous peoples' lands in Australia, cities in the US, subnational governments in Kenya, or a brewery in India, we are facing these same challenges around water and climate. So I'm indeed from the IFRC, and I warn you, it is a very long acronym, the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent National Societies. But basically, we're representing national societies from the Red Cross, Red Crescent in 191 countries. We've got tens of millions of volunteers, but for me the most critical entry point is our 190,000 local branches. So these are really entities working close to the community level. And you slightly touched on it, Bradley, actually, the disasters. And obviously when a disaster hit, it's too late. We're looking at 75% of disasters are water related. And we are looking how do we prepare before, during and after disasters, but obviously we're living in a climate crisis. So in some sense, we're in a constant disaster or crisis. We're very much working with populations who are recovering from one conflict, whether it can be a physical, a war, going into a pandemic, going into a drought, and it starts again. So how do we work in that context, and how do we make sure that we do locally led solutions in that space? So one factor is obviously, and everyone's touched on that, but it's the breaking down of silos. From coming from a disaster community, that means looking at how do we bring meteorological agencies, disaster management agencies together with water actors, the climate ministries, with agricultural ministries. How do we find those joint solutions? And how does that joint governance work at all levels? Globally, nationally, subnationally, and at community level. And I think that's the key. These partnerships need to happen at all levels, and those partnerships look different depending on which level you're at. So I'll touch on a couple of the major programs we have around locally led adaptation. One is indeed the one that Evita was referring to, which is the Water at Heart of Climate Action. Globally speaking, it's part of the Early Warnings for All initiative, and it brings together actors from WMO, so Met Agency, UNDRR, Risk Knowledge, IFRC, who's really looking at communicating risks and the local action. And how do we break our silos globally to then at national level to bring together the Met agencies? We have a representative from Sudan here as a good example of a Met agency taking place. How do we bring those with the climate actors, with the water management and disaster management agencies? And then at local level. And that's something which I found fascinating, that Carleen started with that, looking at Australia. And actually, you were also mentioning in Kenya, we're looking at some of these same partners. And indeed, in our work in the 5 countries where we're working at, it's those same ones. So it is the water user associations or committees. In our case, the Met agencies, it's agricultural extension workers. It's faith-based groups. It can be security groups, Indigenous peoples representatives or local leaders. That's really the essence. And what I find interesting is, on the one hand, we are talking about breaking silos, and you touched on that, both of you, on the finance side. On the other hand, it's also how do we bring this climate agenda into existing agendas, into existing plans and policies, into existing finance systems and mechanisms. Because while we're talking about systems change, we're obviously not going to be able to revolutionize everything, and the crisis is happening now. So some of the factors that we found, both through the Water at the Heart project, as well as a large program we have with the US government on locally led adaptation, is that locally led means different levels of locally led. It is accessing risk information, and around risk information, it is, of course, the scientific data, the meteorological data, but as you were saying, Bradley, it's those stories, it's local perceptions, it's local knowledge of communities now and in the past and for generations on how they've already adapted to drought or to flood, and how do you bring those together? It's about those partnerships, which I touched on again. Policies, absolutely. A number of our city and regional governments were talking about that. And there's so many plans and policies. How do we bring together? But also at local level, communities already have water management plans. What does that mean for them? And how do we bring it into that space? And then importantly, of course, you have risk information, you have partnerships, you have plans. What's your agency to make decisions? And in your case, Bradley, how are you allowed to decide in your lands on the decisions you do for adaptation? And that is really critical. It's that trust, it's that right to decide and do those choices and do that decision making. And then a bit of a boring point, but I think a really critical one, and that came out a lot at the Development and Climate Days we were having on Sunday with a number of adaptation actors, is that it is also about existing financial systems. It's about project management skills. It's not the most exciting topic probably for many of us, but it is about how do we have systems that enable funding to go to local level so it's accountable, it's transparent, and it can be locally managed and used. And how do we use existing audit systems or government finance flows to enable that funding, even if it's short but where it does exist, to go to that local level. And then maybe just to wrap up, this requires changes in our institutions. That's something that we've really seen ourselves. So our ability as institutions to absorb climate information, climate partnerships, policies, decision-making, funding flows. We've been involved on a so-called climate action journey we're rolling out in all our programs, which is really about how do we take climate into how we work. And just to maybe end, none of this is a nice to have. This is a must-have, and what we're talking about here is actually about saving lives, and that's why a disaster management organization takes this so seriously. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Nini. And I think, you touched on the point of breaking silos and bringing actors together and building those partnerships at all levels, which is so key. And then another important point is that mainstreaming into existing policies and plans. I think so often we see so many at all levels is, we're just going to throw money at developing another policy and plan and we're just going to call it something else. We have climate action plans, climate adaptation plans, and they all addressing the same thing. So the importance of mainstreaming, we're running out of time. We can't be developing new plans every year, but we need to start mainstreaming these points into our existing plans and policies. We've got a few minutes, and I'm going to open up the floor for a couple of questions, but can I ask you that you be short and concise with your question? Because otherwise, we're not going to have time to hear from people. So if you do have a question, would you mind raising your hand and I can bring the mic your way?
Thank you. My question is around accountability and new systems of financing. If we stick with the same old financing models, the risk profile of those models will never allow the funds to flow through to the local level because the accountability won't be sufficient for the major donors. How do we deal with that as an issue? Because we really do need funds to flow, and we need to change the way we think about accountability at the local level, I think.
Who wants to take that on first?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm happy to give a couple of points. And one of the points we also deal is, in addition to the local level, we deal with zones of conflict, and we're really seeing 1% of climate finance go there, and it is around accountability. I think it is about that, and it sounds a bit bland, but it is about that trust building with donors as well. The Netherlands government is a good example where I think to be able to do locally led adaptation, you have to have a risk appetite to a certain degree. You have to be able to discuss that we are flexible in what we're monitoring and evaluating in the learning process. We're flexible in what we implement. There's more scope for what are you doing at local level, and it's not as kind of rigid. And I think it requires from everyone a certain kind of flexibility to try it and test it and to learn and then redo it. Because I think you're right, it isn't. The current models and ways and rigid log frames and indicators, timelines are very problematic for doing this type of work.
I actually love this question. I would like to go back to what I mentioned in the beginning, that how you empower the community and nonprofits and stakeholders to be a part of the process and implementation. If you are a funder, when you are giving a grant, I highly encourage you to have a course that these people are part of the decision making, and they have being briefed on a regular basis. And if their needs and in their mind the project is not fulfilled, there will be a course to put a stop order on the projects, or a way that they can go back to the funder and say oh, the implementing agency is not actually delivering on what's supposed to be delivered. So none of us have enough staff to be deployed on the ground to do this work on a consistent basis, but the community is there. They are the ones who the projects are for, and the one that they really care about the project. And if we are implementing their vision, we have to give them the power to give us a feedback and let us know if something is not going well.
Yes, just a small point for me. I think sometimes the scale of the funding is a challenge as well. Sometimes global funders or international funders are looking for multi-million pound investment, where in fact what we're looking for is just small investment at a community level. So sometimes the funds are too big, ironically, so the local communities can't access those funds because they're too laborious or too difficult. And what I would say is what we're finding is we're kind of blending the funding from different companies together to get the scale that we need at a local level, looking at our self-interests, but also looking at the shared interests of the shared risk in those communities and in those basins. So that scale does matter a lot, because sometimes we find that actually the money, the funds are too large and they're too difficult to access.
I suppose it's a challenge, and it's global, no doubt, that governments only fund around their cycle to get the benefit out of their cycle, to say at the end of their cycle, look what we did. And I suppose it's having the courage to move beyond those cycles. In Australia we need a 236-year recovery plan. For instance, to get us back to nature positive, if that's a term. The other one is have the courage to stop funding your mates, have the courage to stop funding the people that have created this mess, giving them subsidies. That's just consistent around the globe, and I think how can we flip that opportunity to involve Indigenous people in that benefit sharing, because we're just not in those spaces, and I believe we have the knowledge to help us get back to a healthy place.
Great. I think we have time for another one very quick question, if we've got a quick question.
For me, it's not really a question. It's just an addition to what was discussed earlier. As a person leading a government, we have the challenge of too much bureaucracy in accessing this financing. So you find there are too many structures that one has to go through to be able to access the finances. We have people between the donor and the beneficiaries calling themselves all manner of names, steering committees, consortium, and they're all taking from the FAD. Is it possible to reduce that bureaucracy and have most of the resources go to the real action, to the real project, instead of finding that you've gotten money and about 50% of it is actually going to those structures and bureaucracies, and very little ending up with the communities?
Yes, that's a really good point. And now I'm talking from the past hat. I worked for the state for a very long time in the United States. And one thing that I highly encourage you is, if you are changing your mind as a funder from someone that is focused on risk to project worthy, then you have that, you can fill that gap. Many of those bureaucracies are in place to address very specific concerns or very specific challenges that happened in the past. But the reality is that we are in a very different era. We got no time anymore, and many of the things that we have put in place is not really responsive to what we need to do on a very efficient and quick time that we have ahead of us. So I always encourage, when I talk to legislators, if you're giving money away, please reduce the strings attached to that and put more of a general measure of accountability that you can hold communities accountable to that. Reduce your great thoughts from whatever you're thinking. If you want to address the issue of water, just general parameters, not very like prescriptive list of things that is in your mind that would be the best. That's the worst thing to do. And if you're like giving it money to the community, just like try to see like, is this a perceived risk or real risk? Like if you're giving a loan as a government to a community, think to see if you can change that to grant or 0% like loan, because in many of these cases, this general like laws or general regulations really is like for an extreme situation. It's not for like reality that happens on a daily basis. So that's like one of the things, like probably the worst case scenario that I have experienced in my government work was like, we said related to the indigenous and tribal communities in California was like, at some point in the time, the state of California funded a tribe, and someone from the tribe, the chairperson, walked away with the money. But because they're sovereign nations, there was no recourse for the government to ask for the money back. So they came up with this whole solution that to address that particular situation, but it caused so many issues for other tribes that had nothing to do with that particular one situation. And it was like, become like very like, we were like, anytime that we were giving like a grant to a community, we will have to ask them, this will need to, if there's any issue, this needs to be challenged in the California court. So therefore, you are agreeing to give up your sovereignty. Like, which is like, if you think about it, it's really extreme. And it's like, we should just like evaluate the real risk. Is it like a one-off situation? Do we really need that extreme? Or just like, as you mentioned, just like have a risk mentality. It's like, okay, that could happen, but let's move fast. Let's help others. That's what we'll do that, yeah.
Great. I think there's been many incredible lessons shared here today, and I really urge you all to take these lessons back to your organizations and advocate for real actionable support for local adaptation efforts. And I think what's really come out of here is a reminder that we are stronger together through collective action. And lastly, I'd just like to thank each of you for being here, and to our speakers, thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing your valuable lessons with each of us here. And enjoy the rest of your day. Can I just ask all the speakers, if you can, just come up for a quick, as I call it, a family photograph on stage quickly. That'd be great. Thanks so much.